The rain was as chaotic as everything around me. He took our money and stability. At that moment, losing fear was my only way out. I had no idea it would change everything forever. The rain pelted against my windshield, each drop a stinging reminder of how quickly life can change. Just a week ago, I had a home, a husband, and a semblance of security for my 3 children. Now, here I was, Sarah Mitchell, 35 years old, driving through a tempest with everything I owned crammed into our old station wagon. "Mommy, I'm hungry," whimpered Lily, my youngest, from the back seat. Her big brown eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and I felt my heart constrict. "I know, sweetie. We'll find somewhere soon," I promised, though I had no idea how I'd keep that promise. The fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty, matching the hollowness in my stomach. Next to Lily, her older siblings, Emma and Jack, sat in uncharacteristic silence. Emma, at 14, tried to put on a brave face, but I could see the worry etched in her furrowed brow. 12-year-old Jack stared out the window, his usual chatter silenced by our dire circumstances. How had it come to this? The question echoed in my mind, competing with the thunderclaps outside. John, my husband of 15 years, had always been impulsive, but I never imagined he'd abandon us. The memory of that fateful morning still felt surreal. I'd woken to find a hastily scribbled note on his pillow. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." Those 7 words were all he'd left behind, along with a mountain of debt and a drained bank account. In one cruel swoop, he'd stripped us of our home, our savings, and our sense of security. The first few days had been a blur of disbelief and frantic phone calls. Friends offered temporary solutions, but with 3 kids and no income, I knew we couldn't impose for long. So here we were, driving through unfamiliar territory, hoping for a miracle. A flash of lightning illuminated a sign. Willowbrook, next exit. I didn't recognize the name, but at this point, any shelter from the storm would do. I took the exit, the tires splashing through puddles that seemed to grow deeper by the second. Willowbrook turned out to be a quaint town, its streets lined with grand old houses that spoke of old money and established families. Under different circumstances, I might have admired their manicured lawns and wraparound porches. Tonight, they only emphasized how out of place we were. "Look, Mom!" Jack's voice broke through my reverie. He was pointing at an imposing iron gate, barely visible through the rain. Beyond it, I could make out the silhouette of a massive house. No, a mansion. "Maybe they'll let us wait out the storm," Emma suggested, a hint of hope in her voice. I hesitated. The idea of knocking on a stranger's door in the middle of the night seemed ludicrous, but as another roll of thunder shook the car, I realized we were out of options. I pulled up to the gate, surprised to find it slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, I eased the car through the opening and up the long, winding driveway. The mansion loomed larger as we approached, its windows dark except for a faint glow from what looked like a study on the ground floor. "Stay in the car," I instructed the kids, unbuckling my seatbelt. "I'll see if anyone's awake." The rain soaked through my thin jacket in seconds as I dashed to the front door. My hand trembled as I reached for the ornate brass knocker. Before I could use it, the door swung open, revealing a man in a wheelchair. His piercing blue eyes scrutinized me, taking in my bedraggled appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "I'm so sorry to disturb you," I began, my words tumbling out in a rush. "My children and I, we're stranded. Our car's almost out of gas, and the storm, I was hoping..." He held up a hand, silencing me. For a moment, I feared he'd turn us away. Then his expression softened. "Come in," he said, wheeling back to make room. "All of you." Relief washed over me. "Thank you," I breathed, turning to wave the kids over. They scrambled out of the car, huddling close as we entered the grand foyer. The man introduced himself as Alexander Blackwood, the owner of the mansion. As he led us to a spacious living room, I couldn't help but notice the opulence around us. Crystal chandeliers, priceless artwork, antique furniture. It was a world away from anything we'd ever known. "Martha," Alexander called, and an older woman appeared, her kind face a stark contrast to the formal surroundings. Please prepare some hot chocolate for our guests and see if you can find some dry clothes for them." As Martha bustled off, Alexander turned his attention back to us. "Now," he said, his tone gentler than before, "why don't you tell me how you ended up on my doorstep in the middle of a storm?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But there was something in Alexander's eyes, a mixture of genuine concern and understanding, that made me open up. I told him about John's abandonment, our sudden homelessness, and our desperate drive into the unknown. As I spoke, I watched Alexander's expression change from curiosity to sympathy to something I couldn't quite identify. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're welcome to stay here tonight," he finally said. "We have plenty of room, and it's far too dangerous to be on the roads in this weather." The kids' faces lit up, and I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. We won't be any trouble, I promise." He waved off my thanks. "Please, call me Alexander, and it's no trouble at all. In fact," he paused, seeming to consider something. "I have a proposition for you, Sarah, but let's discuss it in the morning. For now, get some rest." Martha returned with hot chocolate and a pile of clean, dry clothes. As she showed us to our rooms, actual guest suites, each bigger than our old apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change dramatically. Lying in bed that night, listening to the storm gradually subside, I replayed the evening's events in my mind. The pain of John's betrayal was still raw, but for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Whatever Alexander's proposition was, I knew I'd consider it seriously. For my children's sake, I had to seize any opportunity to provide them with stability. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't have imagined just how profoundly that stormy night would alter the course of our lives. The mansion that had been a temporary refuge would soon become the backdrop for a journey of healing, growth, and unexpected love. But those revelations were still to come. For now, we slept, safe and warm, as the first light of dawn began to break through the clouds outside. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, gently rousing me from a deep sleep. For a moment, I was disoriented, the luxurious surroundings a stark contrast to the cramped motel rooms we'd been calling home. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, the storm, the desperation, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger. I sat up, running my fingers through my tangled hair. The room was larger than our entire old apartment, decorated in muted tones of blue and gold. It felt like a dream, one I was afraid to wake from. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting to see Martha, the housekeeper. To my surprise, it was Alexander who entered, skillfully maneuvering his wheelchair through the doorway. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted me, his voice warm. "I hope you and your children slept well." "We did, thank you," I replied, suddenly self-conscious of my disheveled appearance. "Mr. Blackwood, Alexander, I can't thank you enough for your kindness last night." He waved off my gratitude with a smile. "It was the least I could do. Now, if you're feeling up to it, I'd like to discuss that proposition I mentioned." Curiosity piqued, I nodded. "Of course, just give me a few minutes to check on the kids and freshen up." "Take your time," he said. "I'll be in the study downstairs when you're ready." As Alexander left, I quickly dressed in the clothes Martha had provided, simple but elegant attire that fit surprisingly well. I then peeked into my children's rooms, finding them still fast asleep, their faces peaceful for the first time in days. Downstairs, I found Alexander in a book-lined study, sunlight streaming through tall windows that overlooked meticulously maintained gardens. He gestured for me to take a seat in a plush armchair across from him. "Sarah," he began, his blue eyes intense, "I'll be direct. I'm in need of a live-in caregiver, and I believe you might be the perfect candidate." I blinked, caught off guard. "Me? But I don't have any medical training." Alexander shook his head. "I have nurses for the medical aspects. What I need is someone to help manage the household, assist with my daily routines, and provide companionship." He paused, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "This house has been empty for too long." As he outlined the position, a generous salary, accommodation for my family, and even provisions for the children's education, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. It seemed too good to be true. A lifeline thrown when we were drowning. Why me? I couldn't help but ask. You don't know anything about me. Alexander's lips curved into a small smile. I'm a good judge of character, Sarah. You're resilient, caring, and clearly devoted to your children. Those are qualities I admire and need in a caregiver. I took a deep breath, considering the offer. It would mean uprooting the kids again, but hadn't we already lost our roots? This could be a fresh start, a chance to rebuild our lives in a safe environment. Can I have some time to think about it? And to discuss it with my children? Of course. Alexander nodded. Take the day to explore the grounds, talk with your family. We can discuss your decision over dinner. As I left the study, my mind was whirling with possibilities. I found the kids in the kitchen, where Martha was serving them a breakfast that looked like it belonged in a gourmet restaurant. Mom, Lily exclaimed, her face smeared with syrup. Can we stay here forever? I laughed, ruffling her hair. Well, that's something we need to talk about, actually. Over breakfast, I explained Alexander's offer to the children. Their reactions were mixed. Excitement from Lily, cautious optimism from Jack, and skepticism from Emma. But what about our friends? Our school? Emma asked, her forehead creased with worry. Honey, we can't go back to our old life, I said gently. This is an opportunity for a new start, for all of us. Jack nodded slowly. Mr. Blackwood seems nice. And did you see the size of the TV in the living room? I couldn't help but smile at his priorities. There's more to consider than just material things, Jack. But yes, Mr. Blackwood has been very kind to us. After breakfast, we spent the morning exploring the expansive grounds of the Blackwood estate. The mansion sat on acres of manicured lawns, dotted with gardens, a small orchard, and even a pond. As we walked, I watched my children's faces, seeing a sparkle in their eyes that had been missing for too long. We came across Alexander in the rose garden, where he was carefully tending to a bush of vibrant red blooms. He looked up as we approached, a warm smile spreading across his face. Ah, the Mitchell family. Are you enjoying the tour? Lily, always the boldest, stepped forward. Your house is amazing, Mr. Blackwood. Do you really live here all alone? A shadow passed over Alexander's face, so quickly I almost missed it. I do, little one. It's been just me for a while now. That must be lonely, Jack observed, with a perceptiveness that surprised me. Alexander's gaze met mine, and I saw a depth of emotion in his eyes that made my heart ache. Yes, he said softly. It can be. As we continued our walk, I found myself hanging back to talk with Alexander. He told me about the history of the estate, how it had been in his family for generations. But it was what he didn't say that intrigued me. The way his voice caught when he mentioned certain rooms, the longing in his eyes when he watched my children laugh and play. By the time we returned to the house for lunch, I had made my decision. This wasn't just about a job or a place to live. It was about healing, for my family, and perhaps for Alexander too. Over a delicious meal prepared by Martha, I announced our decision to stay. The joy on Lily and Jack's faces was immediate, while Emma managed a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I made a mental note to have a heart-to-heart with her later. Alexander's reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. A softening around his eyes, a relaxing of his shoulders as if a weight had been lifted. I'm glad, he said simply, but the warmth in his voice spoke volumes. The rest of the day was a flurry of activity. Alexander insisted on sending for our belongings from the car, and Martha helped us settle into our new rooms. As I unpacked the meager possessions we had left, I was struck by the contrast between our old life and this new one we were stepping into. That evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me with wide, serious eyes. Mommy, are we going to be okay now? I hugged her tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. Yes, sweetheart, I think we are. Later, I stood at the window of my new room, looking out over the moonlit gardens. The events of the past few days felt surreal. The devastation of John's abandonment, the terror of that stormy night, and now this unexpected turn of fortune. A soft knock at my door pulled me from my reverie. It was Alexander, a thoughtful expression on his face. I wanted to thank you, he said, for accepting the position. I have a feeling your presence here will bring about changes I've needed for a long time. As I watched him wheel away down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Something was shifting, not just for my family, but for Alexander too. We were all embarking on a new chapter, one filled with possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. Climbing into bed, I allowed myself to hope for the first time in weeks. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. My children, Alexander, and me. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow would be the first day of our new life, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. The first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, gently rousing me from sleep. For a moment, I lay still, savoring the unfamiliar comfort of the plush bed. It had been a week since we'd moved into the Blackwood mansion, and I was still adjusting to our new reality. As I went through my morning routine, I couldn't help but marvel at the turn our lives had taken. The spacious bathroom, with its marble countertops and rainfall shower, was a far cry from the cramped motel bathrooms we'd been using. Yet, amidst the luxury, a nagging guilt persisted. Did we really deserve all this? I pushed the thought aside as I made my way downstairs. The house was already alive with activity. Martha was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, while Alexander sat at the dining table, poring over the morning newspaper. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted me, his blue eyes crinkling with a warm smile. "Sleep well?" I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Better than I have in weeks. Thank you again for everything, Alexander." He waved off my gratitude. "Please, you're earning your keep. Speaking of which, I was hoping you could join me in the study after breakfast. There are some household matters I'd like to discuss." As we talked over breakfast, I watched my children, each adapting to our new life in their own way. Lily, at 7, was thriving. She'd taken to following Martha around, eager to help with any task she could. This morning, she was carefully arranging flowers in a vase, her little tongue sticking out in concentration. Jack, now 13, had discovered the mansion's extensive library and spent hours exploring its shelves. He sat at the table now, nose buried in a thick volume about world geography. Alexander had noticed his interest and often engaged him in discussions about far-off places and cultures. Emma, at 15, was having the hardest time adjusting. She picked at her food, her expression guarded. I made a mental note to check in with her later. After breakfast, I joined Alexander in his study. The room had quickly become my favorite in the house, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and large windows overlooking the gardens. "Sarah," Alexander began, his tone serious, "I wanted to discuss the upcoming charity gala. It's an annual event hosted here at the mansion, and I'll need your help to ensure everything runs smoothly." I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. Planning events wasn't exactly in my wheelhouse, but I was determined to rise to the challenge. "Of course. What do you need me to do?" As Alexander outlined the details, guest lists, catering, decorations, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was a world I'd never been part of before, and I was acutely aware of how out of my depth I was. Sensing my unease, Alexander paused. "Sarah, I have complete faith in your abilities. You've already proven yourself more than capable in managing the household. This is just an extension of that." His confidence in me was touching, and I felt some of my anxiety ease. "Thank you, Alexander. I won't let you down." As we continued to discuss the gala, I couldn't help but notice the way Alexander's eyes lit up when he talked about the charity the event was supporting, a foundation for spinal cord injury research. There was a personal connection there, I realized, though I didn't feel it was my place to pry. Our planning session was interrupted by a commotion from outside. We both turned to the window to see Jack running across the lawn, laughing, with Emma in hot pursuit. It was the first time I'd seen Emma smile in days. Alexander chuckled. "It's good to hear laughter in this house again," he said softly, almost to himself. I looked at him curiously. "Has it been that long?" A shadow passed over his face. "Too long," he admitted. "This house, it hasn't felt like a home in years. Not since the accident." I wanted to ask more, but Alexander quickly changed the subject, returning to our discussion of the gala. As we talked, I found myself studying him more closely. Despite his wealth and status, there was a loneliness about him that tugged at my heart. Later that afternoon, I found Emma sitting alone on a bench in the garden. I sat down beside her, waiting patiently for her to speak. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Mom, do you think Dad will ever come back?" The question caught me off guard, and I had to take a moment to collect my thoughts. "Honey, I don't know," I said honestly. "But what I do know is that we're safe here, and we have an opportunity to build a new life for ourselves." Emma nodded slowly. I miss our old life sometimes, even though I know it wasn't perfect." I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shoulders shake with quiet sobs. "It's okay to miss it, sweetheart. Change is hard. But we're in this together, okay?" As we sat there, I saw Alexander watching us from his study window. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw understanding and compassion in his gaze. In that moment, I felt a connection to him that went beyond our professional relationship. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. I helped Lily with her homework, listened to Jack excitedly recount a chapter from his latest book, and worked with Martha to plan out meals for the week. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted but content. After putting the kids to bed, I found myself wandering to the kitchen for a late-night snack. To my surprise, Alexander was there, struggling to reach a high shelf from his wheelchair. Without thinking, I moved to help him. "Let me get that for you," I said, easily retrieving the box of tea he was after. "Thank you," he said, a hint of frustration in his voice. Sometimes I forget my limitations. I sat down across from him at the kitchen island. "It must be difficult." Alexander was quiet, I said softly, his hands wrapped around his mug of tea. "It is," he admitted, "but it's gotten easier over the years. And having you and your family here, it's brought a life to this house that I'd forgotten could exist." His words warmed me, and I felt a surge of affection for this man who had so generously opened his home to us. "We're grateful to be here," I said. "You've given us a second chance at happiness." As we sat there, talking softly in the dim light of the kitchen, I felt a shift in our relationship. We weren't just employer and employee anymore. We were becoming friends, confidants, maybe even family. When I finally bid Alexander goodnight and headed to bed, my mind was swirling with thoughts. Our lives had changed so dramatically in such a short time, and I knew there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time in months, I felt truly hopeful about the future. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. Little did I know how right that feeling would prove to be, or how the bonds we were forming would be tested in the days to come. The weeks leading up to the charity gala flew by in a whirlwind of preparations. I threw myself into the planning, determined to make the event a success. It was a welcome distraction from the lingering pain of John's abandonment and the challenges of adjusting to our new life. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the seating arrangements in Alexander's study, I noticed him staring out the window, his expression distant. "Alexander?" I called softly. "Is everything all right?" He turned to me, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Just lost in memories, Sarah. The gala always brings them back." Curiosity got the better of me. "May I ask what kind of memories?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing the arm of his wheelchair. "It was at a gala much like this one that my life changed forever," he finally said. "The night of the accident." I sat down across from him, sensing he needed to talk. "What happened?" I asked gently. He took a deep breath. "I was leaving the event, riding high on the success of the evening. I'd secured a major donation for the charity. I was careless, driving too fast on the winding roads. When the deer appeared, I swerved to avoid it and..." His voice trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. The accident that had left him paralyzed. "I'm so sorry, Alexander," I said, reaching out to touch his hand. "That must have been devastating." He nodded, his blue eyes meeting mine. "It was, but in some ways it opened my eyes, made me realize what truly matters in life." As we sat there, a comfortable silence between us, I felt our connection deepen. Alexander wasn't just my employer anymore. He was becoming a friend, someone I cared for deeply. The moment was broken by the sound of raised voices from the hallway. We exchanged a glance before I hurried to investigate. I found Emma and Jack in a heated argument, their faces flushed with anger. "What's going on here?" I demanded. Emma whirled on me, her eyes flashing. Jack went through my things. He found the letters from Dad and read them. My heart sank. I'd been keeping John's attempts to contact us a secret, not wanting to upset the delicate balance we'd achieved. "Is this true?" I asked Jack, who looked torn between defiance and guilt. He nodded reluctantly. "I just wanted to know what was going on." "Why haven't you told us Dad's been writing?" I sighed, feeling the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. "Let's talk about this as a family," I said, ushering them into the living room. As we sat down, I noticed Alexander watching from the doorway. He gave me an encouraging nod before discreetly withdrawing, giving us privacy. "I'm sorry I kept this from you," I began, looking at each of my children in turn. "Your father has been trying to reconnect, but I wasn't sure of his intentions. I wanted to protect you." Emma's expression softened slightly. "We're not little kids anymore, Mom. We can handle the truth." "You're right," I admitted. "I should have been more open with you. Your father says he's changed, that he wants to make amends, but I'm wary of letting him back into our lives after what he did." Jack leaned forward, his face serious. "Do you think he really means it?" I hesitated. "I don't know, honey. People can change, but it takes more than just words. It takes time and consistent actions." We spent the next hour talking, really talking, for the first time since John left. There were tears, angry outbursts, and moments of quiet reflection. But by the end, I felt we'd taken a step towards healing as a family. As the kids headed off to bed, emotionally drained but perhaps a little lighter, I found Alexander waiting for me in the kitchen. "How did it go?" he asked, sliding a mug of tea across the counter to me. I sank onto a stool, suddenly exhausted. "It was tough, but necessary. I think we're going to be okay." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "You're doing a remarkable job with them, Sarah. Don't doubt yourself." His words warmed me, chasing away some of the lingering doubts. "Thank you, Alexander, for everything." The next few days passed in a blur of final gala preparations. I was so focused on making sure every detail was perfect that I almost missed the subtle changes happening around me. Emma started spending more time with us, offering to help with the event planning. Jack threw himself into researching the charity we were supporting, eager to understand more about spinal cord injuries. Even Lily seemed to sense the shift, her drawings filled with pictures of our new family, including Alexander. The night of the gala arrived, and the mansion was transformed. Twinkling lights adorned the gardens, soft music drifted through the air, and the scent of flowers perfumed every room. As guests began to arrive, I felt a flutter of nerves. This was my first time hosting such an event, and I was determined not to let Alexander down. "You look beautiful," a voice behind me said. I turned to see Alexander, dapper in a tuxedo, smiling up at me. I smoothed down my borrowed gown, feeling self-conscious. "Thank you. I feel a bit out of place, to be honest." Alexander took my hand, his touch sending a jolt through me. "You belong here, Sarah. More than you know." As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing. The guests were charming, the food was delicious, and the speeches were moving. I watched with pride as Alexander addressed the crowd, his passion for the cause evident in every word. It was during a quiet moment, as I stepped out onto the terrace for some air, that everything changed. I overheard a conversation between two guests that made my blood run cold. "Can you believe Alexander's letting his housekeeper play hostess?" one woman whispered. "I heard she's some charity case he took in, probably trying to get her hands on his fortune." "Well, you know how lonely he's been since Caroline died," her companion replied. "He's vulnerable. Someone should warn him before he does something foolish." I stumbled back inside, my mind reeling. Caroline? Alexander had never mentioned a wife, and the implication that I was after his money, it was too much. I found myself in a quiet corner, trying to catch my breath. That's where Alexander found me, concern etched on his face. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just my employer or my friend, but a man I was falling in love with, and it terrified me. "Who's Caroline?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's face paled. "Where did you hear that name?" "It doesn't matter," I said, suddenly feeling foolish and out of place in my borrowed finery. I think I think I need some air. As I rushed away, leaving a bewildered Alexander behind, I realized that our carefully constructed new life was about to face its biggest challenge yet. The revelations of this night would change everything, and I wasn't sure if we were ready for what was to come. The days following the gala were tense. I threw myself into my work, keeping busy with household tasks and caring for the children, all while avoiding being alone with Alexander. The name, Caroline, echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of how little I truly knew about the man who had become such an important part of our lives. It was Emma who finally confronted me about the change in atmosphere. We were in the kitchen, preparing dinner together, when she set down her knife and fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Mom, what's going on between you and Mr. Blackwood?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's complicated, sweetie." Emma rolled her eyes. "I'm not a kid anymore, Mom. I can see something's wrong. You've been avoiding him." I sighed, realizing I owed my daughter more honesty. "You're right. I overheard something at the gala that made me question how well I know Alexander." "Is it about his wife?" Emma asked, surprising me. "How did you know about that?" She shrugged. "I've been helping Martha organize some old photo albums. There are pictures of Mr. Blackwood with a woman. Martha said she was his wife, Caroline." I felt a pang of jealousy, quickly followed by shame. Of course, Alexander had a past. We all did. But why hadn't he mentioned Caroline to me? "Mom," Emma said softly, "I think you should talk to him. Whatever it is, it can't be as bad as you're imagining." I looked at my daughter, marveling at her maturity. When had she grown up so much? "When did you get so wise?" I asked, pulling her into a hug. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I found myself standing outside Alexander's study. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. "Come in," his voice called. I entered to find him by the window, gazing out at the moonlit garden. He turned as I approached, and I could see the toll the past few days had taken on him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his normally immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled. "Sarah," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I was hoping we could talk." I nodded, taking a seat across from him. "I think we need to." There was a moment of awkward silence before we both started speaking at once. "I'm sorry for avoiding you. I should have told you about Caroline." We stopped, sharing a small smile at the synchronicity. "Please," Alexander said, gesturing for me to continue. I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for avoiding you. I overheard something at the gala about Caroline, and I didn't know how to process it." Alexander's expression softened. "No, I'm the one who should apologize. I should have told you about her. It's still painful to talk about." "What happened?" I asked gently. Alexander wheeled himself to a nearby bookshelf, retrieving a framed photograph. He handed it to me, and I saw a younger, standing Alexander, with his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. "Caroline was my wife," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "We were married for 10 years before the accident. She was everything to me." I listened as Alexander recounted their love story, how they met at a charity event, their whirlwind romance, and their shared passion for philanthropy. But as he spoke about the night of the accident, his voice grew strained. "She was in the car with me that night," he said, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "When we crashed, she didn't make it." My heart broke for him. "Oh, Alexander, I'm so sorry." He nodded, taking a shaky breath. "For years, I blamed myself. I pushed everyone away, buried myself in work. This house became a mausoleum of memories." I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "Is that why you never remarried?" "Partly," he admitted. "But also because I never thought I'd find that kind of love again. Until..." He trailed off, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that took my breath away. "Until what?" I whispered, though I think I already knew the answer. "Until you and your children came into my life," he said softly. "Sarah, you've brought light back into this house, into my life. I know it's complicated, with our situation and your past, but I can't deny my feelings for you any longer." My heart raced as I processed his words. Part of me wanted to throw caution to the wind, to embrace the connection we'd been building, but another part held back, wary of the complexities of our situation. "Alexander," I began, my voice trembling slightly. I care for you too. More than I thought possible. But this is also overwhelming. I have the children to think about, and we're still healing from John's abandonment. And you're my employer. It's a lot to process. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know. I'm not asking for any decisions right now. I just wanted you to know the truth about Caroline and about how I feel. We talked for hours that night, sharing our fears, our hopes, and our pasts. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever happened next, we'd face it with honesty and openness. As I left Alexander's study, emotionally drained but somehow lighter, I found Emma waiting in the hallway. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. "It's going to be okay, Mom," she whispered. "We're all in this together." Over the next few weeks, a new rhythm settled over the household. Alexander and I navigated our evolving relationship carefully, mindful of the children and the delicate balance we'd established. We shared lingering glances over dinner, quiet conversations in the garden, and a growing understanding of each other's hearts. The children, perceptive as ever, seemed to sense the change. Jack became more attentive to Alexander, eager to learn from him. Lily's drawings now regularly featured Alexander as part of our family unit, and Emma, my rock through it all, watched with a mixture of caution and hope. It was during a family picnic in the garden, watching Alexander teach Jack how to play chess while Lily wove flower crowns, that I realized how seamlessly he had become part of our lives. The pain of John's betrayal was still there, a dull ache in the background, but it no longer defined us. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the scene, I caught Alexander's eye. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as a family. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and our newfound happiness was about to face its greatest challenge yet. As I helped Alexander back into his wheelchair, neither of us could have predicted the storm that was brewing on the horizon, a storm that would shake the very foundations of the life we were building together. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as I made my way down the winding driveway of the Blackwood estate. It had become my morning ritual to collect the mail, a moment of solitude before the day's activities began. As I approached the ornate mailbox, I noticed a sleek black car parked just outside the gates. My heart skipped a beat as a familiar figure stepped out of the vehicle. John. I froze, the stack of envelopes clutched tightly to my chest. After months of silence, save for a few letters, here he was, standing mere feet away from the new life we'd built without him. "Sarah," he said, his voice a mixture of uncertainty and hope. You look good." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "What are you doing here, John?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "I've been trying to reach you to explain. When I didn't hear back, I had to see you, see the kids. You can't just show up like this," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You left us, John. You don't get to waltz back in whenever you feel like it." His face fell. I know I messed up. I panicked. I couldn't handle the pressure. But I've changed, Sarah. I've gotten help, found a good job. I want to make things right. Before I could respond, I heard the whir of Alexander's motorized wheelchair behind me. "Is everything all right, Sarah?" he called, concern evident in his voice. John's eyes darted between Alexander and me, a flash of understanding, and something else, jealousy perhaps, crossing his face. "I see," he said quietly. "I guess a lot has changed." Alexander reached us, positioning himself protectively at my side. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his tone polite but cool. I placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. "Alexander, this is John, my ex-husband." The tension in the air was palpable as the two men sized each other up. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "Mr. Mitchell, while I understand your desire to see your family, showing up unannounced is not appropriate. Perhaps we could arrange a more suitable time for a visit." John looked like he wanted to argue, but seemed to think better of it. "Fine," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "But we need to talk, Sarah. About the kids. About us." "There is no us, John. I said firmly. "But we can discuss arrangements for you to see the children. I'll have my lawyer contact you." As John got back into his car, I felt a mix of emotions washing over me: anger, sadness, and a surprising sense of closure. Watching him drive away, I realized that the man I had once loved was now a stranger to me. Alexander's hand on mine brought me back to the present. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. I nodded, managing a small smile. "I will be. Thank you for being here." As we made our way back to the house, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. How would I tell the children their father had returned? The news of John's appearance sent shockwaves through our carefully constructed new life. Emma retreated into herself, spending hours alone in her room. Jack oscillated between excitement at the prospect of seeing his father and anger over the abandonment. Lily, too young to fully understand, simply asked when Daddy was coming home. Alexander, bless him, was a rock through it all. He gave us space when we needed it, but was always there with a listening ear or a comforting word. I found myself falling even deeper in love with him, amazed by his patience and understanding. One evening, as we sat in the study discussing the situation, Alexander surprised me with a suggestion. "Sarah," he began hesitantly, "I've been thinking. What if we formalized our relationship?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He took my hand, his blue eyes earnest. "I mean marriage. I know it's sudden, and with John back in the picture, it's complicated. But I love you, Sarah. I love your children. I want to protect you, to give you and the kids the stability you deserve." My heart raced. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to embrace the safety and love Alexander offered. But another part hesitated, wary of rushing into another marriage, especially with the situation so volatile. "Alexander," I said gently, "I love you too. But this is a big decision, one that affects not just us, but the children as well. Can we take some time to think about it?" He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. I don't want to pressure you. I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what." As the days passed, we worked to establish a new normal. John began supervised visits with the children, which brought a mix of emotions for everyone involved. Emma remained distant, while Jack seemed to blossom under his father's attention. Lily, sweet Lily, took it all in stride, happy to have both her daddies in her life. It was during one of these visits that the fragile peace we'd established shattered. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard raised voices from the living room. I rushed in to find John and Alexander in a heated argument, with the children watching wide-eyed from the corner. "You think you can just buy your way into their lives?" John was shouting. "They're my children." Alexander, usually so composed, was red-faced with anger. "I've been here for them when you weren't. Where were you when they needed a father?" "Stop it," I yelled, stepping between them. "Both of you. This isn't helping anyone." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I turned to the children, my heart breaking at the fear and confusion on their faces. "Emma, take your siblings upstairs, please." As the kids filed out, I faced the two men who had become the central figures in my life. "This has to stop," I said firmly. "We need to find a way to coexist, for the children's sake." John had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right. I'm sorry, it's hard seeing someone else in my place." Alexander wheeled back, taking a deep breath to calm himself. "I apologize as well. This situation is challenging for all of us." As we stood there, the three of us caught in this complicated web of emotions and relationships, I realized that the decision I'd been avoiding could no longer be put off. The stability of our family, the future of my children, hung in the balance. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself standing on the balcony of my room, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. The cool night air helped clear my head as I weighed my options. On one side was John, the father of my children, a man I had once loved deeply. He was trying to change, to be the husband and father he should have been. But could I ever truly trust him again? On the other side was Alexander, a man who had opened his heart and home to us, who loved my children as his own. He offered stability, love, and a future I had never dared to dream of. But was it fair to him to always have John in our lives? As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, I made my decision. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but I knew in my heart it was the right choice for all of us. Little did I know that my decision would set in motion a series of events that would test the strength of our newfound family in ways I could never have imagined. The morning after my sleepless night of contemplation, I gathered everyone in the living room. The air was thick with tension as John, Alexander, and the children settled in, all eyes on me. Taking a deep breath, I began. I've made a decision about our future, and it affects all of us. I turned to John first. John, you'll always be the children's father, and I want you to be part of their lives. But we can't go back to what we were. Too much has changed. John's face fell, but he nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then, I faced Alexander, my heart swelling with love and gratitude. Alexander, you've become such an important part of our lives. You've shown us what it means to be a family, in every sense of the word. I took Alexander's hand, squeezing it gently. I love you, and if the offer still stands, I'd like to accept your proposal. The room erupted in a cacophony of reactions. Lily squealed with delight, launching herself into Alexander's lap. Jack's eyes widened in surprise, a mix of emotions playing across his face. Emma remained silent, her expression unreadable. John stood abruptly, his jaw clenched. I see. Well, I hope you'll be very happy together, he said, his voice strained. Without another word, he strode out of the room. As the door slammed behind him, I felt a pang of guilt, quickly overshadowed by relief. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was confident in my choice. Alexander pulled me close, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you, Sarah. I promise to love and cherish you and the children for as long as I live. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. We began planning a small, intimate wedding ceremony to be held in the mansion's garden. Emma, to my surprise and delight, threw herself into the preparations, helping to choose flowers and decorations. Jack, however, became increasingly withdrawn. One evening, I found him sitting alone on the porch swing, staring out at the darkening sky. Hey, buddy, I said softly, sitting beside him. Want to talk about it? He was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Mom, do you think Dad will stop visiting once you marry Alexander? My heart ached at the worry in his voice. No, sweetie. Your dad will always be your dad, and he'll always be part of your life. This change doesn't erase the past or replace him. Jack nodded slowly. I like Alexander. I really do. It's just confusing sometimes. I pulled him into a hug, marveling at how quickly he was growing up. I know it is, but we're all in this together, okay? We'll figure it out as a family. As our wedding day approached, the mansion buzzed with excitement. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, disaster struck. It started with a phone call in the middle of the night. Alexander's sister Elizabeth had been in a car accident. She was stable, but would need extensive care during her recovery. Without hesitation, Alexander insisted she come stay with us. She's my only family, he explained. I have to be there for her. I agreed, of course, but I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Elizabeth had always been polite, but distant during her infrequent visits. How would she react to the changes in her brother's life? Elizabeth arrived a week before the wedding, her normally impeccable appearance marred by a cast on her arm and a nasty gash on her forehead. From the moment she wheeled into the mansion, it was clear she was not happy with the situation. Really, Alexander, she sniffed, eyeing the children's toys scattered in the foyer. I hardly recognize this place anymore. Alexander, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over. It's a home now, Liz. A real home. But Elizabeth was not easily won over. She watched our interactions with narrowed eyes, her disapproval palpable. I tried to be understanding, reminding myself that she was in pain and adjusting to a big change. But as the days passed, her attitude began to wear on all of us. The breaking point came 3 days before the wedding. I overheard Elizabeth talking to Alexander in his study, her voice sharp with anger. Are you out of your mind, Alex? Marrying the help and becoming an instant father to 3 children? This isn't you. I held my breath, waiting for Alexander's response. This is exactly who I am, Elizabeth, he said firmly. Sarah and the children have brought joy and purpose back into my life. I won't let you or anyone else ruin that." Pride and love swelled in my chest at his words. But Elizabeth wasn't finished. "She's using you, can't you see that? A convenient meal ticket for her and those brats." "What would Caroline think?" I gasped, the cruel words hitting me like a physical blow. Before I could stop myself, I burst into the room. "How dare you?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You don't know anything about me or my children. We love Alexander for who he is, not what he can give us." Elizabeth looked shocked at my intrusion, but quickly recovered her haughty demeanor. "Well, isn't this convenient? Eavesdropping now, are we?" Alexander wheeled between us, his face a mask of disappointment. "That's enough, Elizabeth. I think it's best if you leave." For a moment, I thought she might argue, but something in Alexander's expression must have convinced her he was serious. Without another word, she stormed out of the study. In the tense silence that followed, I turned to Alexander, tears pricking at my eyes. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have interfered." He took my hand, pulling me gently into his lap. "You have nothing to apologize for, my love." Elizabeth was out of line. This is our home, our family. Nothing she says can change that. As we sat there, holding each other close, I realized that this was just one of many storms we would weather together. But with Alexander by my side, I felt strong enough to face anything. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was celebrating with us. Despite Elizabeth's abrupt departure and the lingering tension from recent events, joy permeated every corner of the mansion. Emma helped me into my simple white dress, her nimble fingers fastening the delicate buttons. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. As I prepared to walk down the aisle, or in this case the garden path, I caught sight of a familiar figure at the back of the gathered guests. John had come, after all. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness or approval exactly, but it was acceptance. And for now, that was enough. With Lily scattering rose petals before me, and Jack proudly escorting me, I made my way to where Alexander waited. The love shining in his eyes as he saw me approach made my heart soar. As we exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever life might bring, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was right. This was where we belonged. But even as we celebrated our new beginning, I couldn't shake the feeling that our greatest challenge was yet to come. The road ahead would not be easy, but with love, trust, and the strength of our newly forged family, I believed we could face anything. Little did I know how soon that belief would be put to the test. The weeks following our wedding were a blissful blur of family dinners, laughter-filled game nights, and quiet moments of contentment. Alexander and I settled into our new roles as husband and wife, while the children adapted to having a permanent father figure in their lives. Even John, true to his word, maintained a respectful presence, visiting the children regularly and slowly rebuilding trust. But as autumn gave way to winter, a shadow fell over our happiness. It began with a letter, innocuous at first glance, that arrived on a crisp December morning. "What is it?" I asked, noticing Alexander's furrowed brow as he read. He hesitated, then handed me the letter. "It's from the board of directors at my company. They're calling for an emergency meeting." As I scanned the contents, my heart sank. The letter hinted at financial irregularities and questioned Alexander's ability to lead, given his personal circumstances. It was clear that someone was trying to push him out. "This is ridiculous," I fumed. "You've dedicated your life to this company. How can they do this?" Alexander sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "I've made enemies over the years, Sarah. And now, with our marriage and the changes in my life, they see an opportunity to strike." Over the next few days, Alexander spent long hours in his study, poring over financial records and making countless phone calls. I did my best to support him, bringing him meals and offering words of encouragement, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. The situation came to a head at the board meeting. I insisted on accompanying Alexander, determined to stand by his side. As we entered the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Familiar faces lined the long table, some sympathetic, others openly hostile. To our surprise, Elizabeth was there, seated at the far end of the table, Her presence sent a chill down my spine, and I suddenly understood the source of the whispers and insinuations. The meeting was brutal. Accusations flew, veiled threats were made, and at times it seemed as though Alexander's entire legacy was being dismantled before our eyes. But through it all, he remained calm and dignified, countering each claim with facts and reason. As the debate raged on, I found my own voice. Standing up, I addressed the board directly. "You all know Alexander," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "You know his integrity, his vision, his dedication to this company and its employees. The changes in his personal life haven't diminished that. If anything, they've given him a renewed sense of purpose." I could see my words having an impact on some of the board members. Even Elizabeth looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. In the end, it came down to a vote. The minutes it took to tally felt like hours. When the results were announced, Alexander had narrowly retained his position, but it was clear that the trust had been shaken. As we left the boardroom, Alexander squeezed my hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "I couldn't have done this without you." The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in thought. We had won this battle, but at what cost? And what would the future hold? Our answer came sooner than we expected. That evening, as we gathered for dinner, Alexander made an announcement that shocked us all. "I've decided to step down as CEO," he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. Gasps and protests erupted around the table. "But Dad," Emma said, the term of endearment slipping out naturally, "you fought so hard to keep your position." Alexander smiled, reaching out to take my hand. I did, and in doing so, I realized something important. My life's work isn't that company. It's right here, in this room. He went on to explain his plan. He would transition to an advisory role, using his experience to mentor the next generation of leaders. But more importantly, he wanted to focus on our family and on giving back to the community. "I was thinking," he said, a twinkle in his eye, "of starting a foundation, one that helps families in need, like ours once was. What do you all think?" The enthusiasm was immediate and overwhelming. Jack began spouting ideas for fundraising events, while Lily chimed in with suggestions for a logo. Emma, ever practical, was already making lists of potential beneficiaries. As I watched my family excitedly planning this new venture, I felt a wave of love and pride wash over me. We had faced so many challenges: abandonment, distrust, public scrutiny, and emerged stronger for it. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Alexander's transition out of his CEO role was smoother than we'd anticipated, with many in the company expressing their support for his new endeavors. The foundation quickly took shape, with all of us playing a part in its development. Emma, much to our surprise and delight, discovered a passion for nonprofit management, throwing herself into the organizational aspects of the foundation. Jack's natural charm made him a hit at fundraising events, while Lily's artwork became the face of our outreach materials. Even John found a way to contribute, offering his skills as a contractor to help renovate spaces for families in need. Seeing him work alongside Alexander, their past animosity replaced by a shared purpose, filled me with a sense of peace I hadn't known was missing. As spring bloomed around us, bringing new life to the gardens Alexander and I had once walked through as strangers, we celebrated the official launch of the Blackwood Family Foundation. The mansion's grounds were filled with friends, family, and beneficiaries of our first initiatives. Standing at the podium, Alexander's hand in mine, I looked out at the gathered crowd. I saw Martha, beaming with pride at how far we'd come. Elizabeth was there too, her earlier hostility replaced by a tentative acceptance. And in the front row sat our children, Emma, Jack, and Lily, their faces shining with love and accomplishment. "A year ago," I began, my voice carrying across the hushed audience, "I stood on this very spot, a desperate mother seeking shelter from a storm. Today, I stand here as part of something greater than I ever imagined possible." I went on to share our story, not just mine and Alexander's, but the story of our entire blended family, how we had faced adversity, overcome prejudice, and found strength in each other. This foundation, I concluded, is more than just a charity. It's a testament to the power of second chances, of opening your heart to new possibilities. It's proof that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, trust, and the choice to stand by each other, no matter what. As applause erupted, Alexander pulled me close, pressing a kiss to my temple. "You've come a long way from that stormy night," he murmured. I smiled, thinking of all we'd been through. "We all have," I replied, "and this is just the beginning." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself back in the garden where it had all started. The rose bushes Alexander had been tending that day were in full bloom, their fragrance filling the air. Emma joined me, linking her arm through mine. "You know, Mom," she said softly, "I used to think that happy endings only happened in fairy tales." I hugged her close, my heart full. "This isn't an ending, sweetheart. It's a new chapter." As we made our way back to the house, where Alexander, Jack, and Lily were waiting, I felt a sense of completeness I had never known before. Our path hadn't been easy, and I knew there would be more challenges ahead, but we would face them together, as a family bound not by convention, but by choice and love. The mansion that had once been a symbol of loneliness and loss now stood as a beacon of hope, not just for us, but for all the families we would help through our foundation. As I looked at the warm light spilling from its windows, I knew that we had finally, truly, come home.